Ken McCall of the Dayton Daily News has a question for one of our panelists.
I'd like to try to get us to look into the future just a little bit. So I'd start with you, Mr. Faith, with this, but I'd be interested in what anyone has to say. There seems to be sort of an interesting paradox in some of the numbers that have been coming out recently. And an analysis that we just did, this newspaper just did, of foreclosures and sheriff sales of foreclosed properties showed that in Montgomery County, those numbers are actually down for the first 6 months of this year. Foreclosure filings are down 5%, sheriff sales are down 20%. So that seems like it might be a good thing. But today, the Mortgage Bankers Association came out with a report that said the number of people in Ohio, mortgage holders in Ohio, who are in trouble with their mortgage or in foreclosure is up to 14%, which I guess is 1 in 7 of all mortgage holders in Ohio. So what's going on here? Could this be because some of the lenders are holding off a little bit? The mortgage lenders are holding off to see how the whole federal policy shakes out? Are banks just walking away, or are things getting better?
Very good question. Something we were looking at earlier today when this Mortgage Bankers report first came out. And we got to realize in the first quarter of this year, the number was 13% of our homeowners were in trouble, meaning that they're 30 days or more late on their mortgage or are already in foreclosure. That number went up in the second quarter to 14.3%, which is a very significant increase. So the pipeline on delinquencies is what we usually look at as the best predictor for future foreclosures, right? If people get 60, 90 days late, it's pretty likely they're going to head to foreclosure. What we have seen is that this spring there was a lot of activity. Some banks said we're having a foreclosure moratorium, for 2 weeks. Some banks held off until they geared up for the Obama plan. But when you look at what's happened with the Obama plan, which is the best thing we've ever seen from the federal government around this issue, but when you look at what's happened is that the lenders and servicers that signed up for that plan, the best record of any of them is that they're processed about 20% of the homeowners that are eligible. The worst record is even banks that we know, like National City Bank, an Ohio-based lender. Their record is 0%. They've not processed, I think they did 6 cases in the entire country that they've processed through this plan. So their record is dismal in terms of taking advantage of the tools the Obama administration is trying to provide, which includes $75 billion that they've set aside as incentives for servicers to do loan modifications for borrowers as opposed to proceed with foreclosure. So there was a lot of activity, there has been over the last few months around what was going to happen with that. That may have slowed some foreclosure filings. But the other thing that we're seeing, and I don't have numbers on this yet, but is that banks are walking away, or the servicers walking away, meaning that they file a foreclosure, they get a default judgment in court, so if foreclosure's been processed, that homeowner thinks they've lost their home because the court said, ruled in favor of the bank. But then they don't go to sheriff's sale. So if sheriff's sale gets scheduled and the bank or the lender or the servicer pulls that property from going to sale, that creates an entire legal limbo for that property. Technically, the owner, the property owner, the homeowner, is still the owner of record, but it's in the hands of the bank as to what happens for the future of that property. And that creates, if that escalates, and we've seen it escalate in many cities, that's going to create future headaches for our local officials as they try to sort out what they're going to do with that property.
Thank you, Mr. Faith. We are down to just a couple minutes here, and I'm going to ask Alfred Patterson of the local home saver program a question that I'd like him to recognize we have very little time to answer, and it's this. You know, there are many people out there who have no trouble paying their mortgage, aren't worried about foreclosure, and often you'll hear the opinion that, well, gosh, these people got mixed up in the wrong thing and they tried to buy too much house. What do you say to people who have that attitude based on your experience, and why they ought to care about the crisis that some people are in?
Well, to say that someone bought too much house is a simple way to respond when in fact you don't want to really be bothered with an issue, or you really don't have an answer to an issue. It's not a question. I mean, everybody pretty much bought too much house. You bought as much house as the bank would qualify you for because you bought your house based on payment. You didn't buy your house based on the fact that in 3 months GM might do something tricky or NCR might move. You bought your house based on what your next paycheck would allow you to spend on a house payment. So I can appreciate that there are some folks who would step away from any responsibility that they have as a member of the community, but that's short-sighted. And the reality is, whereas you may not be upside down or have an issue with your mortgage, within the next 6 months you may have an issue with some other aspect of your life that the entire community is affected by, or you're affected by how it affects the community. So this issue was not created in a vacuum. It won't be solved in a vacuum. Everyone that owns a home has a vested interest in how we address the foreclosure issue. Everyone that pays a mortgage, everyone that has a home, together we have to resolve this. You can't step out of the ring and say it doesn't affect me.
Thank you. Alfred Patterson, Community Outreach Specialist for the Local Home Saver Program. We've done some good work here tonight. We haven't just talked about the mortgage crisis. We've identified some concrete action that can help and some ideas to work on. It's clear we aren't going to really emerge from this crisis without a lot of hard work. I want to thank Emily McCord of WISO and Ken McCall of the Dayton Daily News. Also a big thank you to our panel, Bill Faith, Executive Director of the Coalition on Homelessness and Housing in Ohio, Alfred Patterson, Community Outreach Specialist for County Corp and its Local Home Saver Program, and Dan Foley, Montgomery County Commissioner. Thanks to WISO, Think TV, and the Dayton Daily News. This is a presentation of WISO, Yellow Springs, Dayton, Springfield, a broadcast service of Antioch University. Facing the mortgage crisis, the next steps has been made possible in part by a grant from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and with assistance from the Ohio Channel. For information or help on mortgage issues, call the United Way at 211 or visit our websites, DaytonDailyNews.com, ThinkTV.org, and WYSO.org. Thank you for joining us tonight.